My relatives actually laughed when I showed up at my father's memorial, but once the attorney began reading his will, the room fell quiet. The envelope had arrived without a return address. Just my name scribbled in rigid, unmistakable handwriting. I almost tossed it with the usual pile of unwanted mail, but something made me pause. My hands shook as I tore it open, not even sure what I was expecting, but already bracing for it. Inside was a funeral notice. My father had passed away. I stared at the invitation, trying to summon some kind of emotion. Grief, disbelief, maybe even resentment. But I just felt numb. It had been 11 years since I'd heard anything from the Hargrove family, over a decade since I'd packed up and left Marlow Creek. I'd turned my back on every cold stare, every harsh whisper, every reminder that I was no longer welcome. They had made that perfectly clear. The day I walked away still lives sharp in my mind. Micah was just a toddler, strapped into the back seat while I drove off with a swollen cheek and a single suitcase stuffed with baby clothes. I had finally left the man who'd hurt more than just my body, and when I showed up at my father's door hoping for help, he gave me nothing but shame. "You made your choices," he said, that was all, but I didn't crumble. I built something new for me and Micah in a small corner of Ridgeport. It was quiet, modest, but it was ours. I found work at the local library putting books on shelves, read stories to Micah each night, and slowly learned how to breathe again. Even though my father never called, never wrote, never asked how we were doing, I still sent money each month. I handed it to old Mr. Bell, who lived next door to him. I made sure he had what he needed. I never spoke of it to anyone, least of all Micah. Now, standing there with that envelope in my hand, the only thing I could think was, why now? Why reach out to the daughter you turned away? Micah must have noticed the look on my face because he came up beside me and asked gently, "Are you going to go?" I didn't answer. My throat felt too tight to speak. I just kept staring at the neat black text on that smooth white page. Then Micah said, "Maybe it's more than just a will, Mom. Maybe he left you something else." I looked at him, my son, my constant, the one who'd seen it all, and something inside me gave way. I didn't know what I was stepping back into, but I did know one thing. If anything had been left unsaid, I had to hear it. So I folded the letter, packed a small bag, and prepared to return to the town I once promised myself I'd never set foot in again. The chapel looked smaller than I remembered. Wooden rafters arched overhead, and colored glass filtered the pale daylight from a cloudy Marlow Creek sky. It should have felt peaceful, but the air was stale, thick with too much perfume and too many buried grudges. I stepped through the double doors with Micah beside me, his fingers clasped tight in mine. People turned as we walked down the aisle. Murmurs followed us, quick and hot like sparks catching dry grass. Some looked surprised, others just stared, their expressions flat and searching, like they weren't sure if I was real. That's when I saw them. Laurel and Dean stood near the front, dressed head to toe in fitted black. Every detail was perfect. Even their sorrow looked rehearsed, painted on just enough to be noticed, but not enough to run. Laurel's eyes locked on mine. For a moment, surprise flickered. Then her mouth curled into something cold and slow. Well, she said under her breath, just loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "Looks like the lost daughter came back hoping for a payout." Dean gave a quiet laugh, but his face didn't match the sound. His look held no warmth, only that same old judgment I'd grown up choking on. I said nothing, just kept walking, head high, shoulders square, even though every part of me wanted to turn around and leave. I slid into a spot at the far end of the last row, as far from them as I could get. I wasn't there for them. I didn't come looking for attention or conflict. I came to say goodbye. Micah slid in beside me, his grip on my hand tightening. I could feel the slight tremble in his fingers. I leaned down and whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart. We're just here to sit." But deep down, I knew it wasn't really okay. At the front, the minister cleared his throat and the service began. A few prayers, some hesitant tributes. The kind of formal grief that sounds more rehearsed than real. No one said my name, not once. No one even hinted that I was his daughter. They moved neatly from tales of his childhood to praising Laurel's devotion, and Dean's frequent flights home to keep things running. The version of his life they painted was clean, polished, with me edited out completely. Micah rested his head on my shoulder, still and quiet. I kept my eyes forward, but every whisper, every glance that lasted too long made my skin prickle. I wasn't crying, not because I didn't want to, but because all my tears had come and gone years ago. When the service ended, people began to trickle out. Some passed me like I wasn't even there. One older cousin gave me a stiff nod, then quickly looked away. Laurel swept past without acknowledging me at all. Then Dean approached. He paused just long enough to look directly at me. "Didn't think you'd have the nerve to come back," he said, low. I met his eyes without looking away. Neither did I. He gave a crooked smirk. "Don't get too comfortable. This isn't your story anymore." And with that, he turned and followed the others. I stayed seated, still as stone, with Micah's head pressed against me and my fingers wrapped around his hand, like it was the only solid thing left in that room. They didn't understand. I wasn't there to be part of their version of the story. I was there to close the chapter. The old Hargrove house hadn't changed a bit. Same white columns out front, same faded brick, same ivy creeping up the porch like it was slowly strangling the place. But stepping inside after 11 years felt like walking straight into a freezer, all sharp edges and quiet in the wrong kind of way. The guests had already started to arrive, my cousins, neighbors from years ago, a couple of my father's former colleagues. Most of the faces were familiar, though no one met my eyes. Their voices lowered the moment I walked in, and I felt every stolen glance like tiny pins brushing against my skin. Laurel stood by the fireplace, swirling white wine in a crystal glass, like it was some kind of toast instead of a memorial. Dean lounged beside her, one hand in his blazer pocket, the other holding a glass of red. They didn't look like they were grieving, they looked like they were hosting. When they saw me step in with Micah, Dean smirked. "Well, this won't take long," he said loudly enough for half the room to catch it. "She's been out of the picture for years." A few awkward chuckles rose up. Others averted their eyes, suddenly fascinated by the decor on the far wall. I said nothing. There was nothing worth saying. I kept my coat on, even though the fireplace was lit and crackling. Micah stuck close, his small fingers wrapped tight around mine. He didn't speak, but I could feel him watching, quietly observing the room, the way only a child who's known both silence and chaos can. We settled into 2 chairs near the back of the parlor, well away from the fire, the wine, and the stairs. I took a slow look around, my eyes settling on the framed photographs still hanging on the walls. Frozen moments from a life that had long since moved on without me. Photos of Laurel during her college days, Dean smiling on a sailboat, family trips to Seabrook Island. Not one picture of me, not even from when we were children. It didn't surprise me. My absence had been carefully, methodically edited out. Laurel's eyes caught mine and she smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was possessive, like I'd stepped into something that now belonged to her. "You're welcome to sit, Rowan," she said sweetly. "Just don't expect a chapter." I didn't respond. Micah looked up at me then, and what I saw in his expression wasn't fear or confusion. It was something sharper, focused, like he knew this wasn't over yet, and he was waiting for the real moment to begin. Somehow, I felt the same. Then the front door creaked open again, and a hush spread through the room. Thomas Delaney stepped inside with the same calm certainty he always carried. Gray suit still neatly pressed, leather briefcase in hand. But this time, he was holding something else. A small cedar box, polished smooth, tucked firmly under one arm. Laurel didn't bother to look up from her glass. Dean checked his watch, clearly already done with the whole affair. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Delaney said. his voice steady and deliberate. As requested by Mr. Hargrove, we'll begin with a recorded message before proceeding to the will itself. The room changed then, a quiet shift in pressure, like the air itself was waiting. A video? Laurel huffed, annoyed. Can't we just get to the point? We already know what's in it. Dean nodded in agreement. Yeah, let's not stretch this out. Some of us have places to be. But Mr. Delaney didn't react. He simply walked past them and placed the cedar box gently on the coffee table in front of the fireplace. Then he set down his briefcase and started to undo the latches. It was your father's explicit instruction, he said evenly, that this be seen before any legal matters are discussed. Laurel rolled her eyes. Dean mumbled something to himself. A few of the cousins leaned in despite themselves, curiosity overtaking politeness. I stayed silent, but Micah straightened beside me, his back tall, his hand easing its grip on mine just a little. I glanced down and saw something in his face, calm, open, but lit from within by something steady and clear. Hope. Micah didn't say a word, but I felt it coming off of him in quiet waves, like he'd somehow known this was coming all along, like he'd been waiting for this moment longer than I had. And for the first time since stepping foot back in that house, I didn't feel alone. The screen flickered once, then again, before the picture settled. A soft buzz filled the room, and then there he was, my father, older than I remembered, noticeably thinner. The strong posture he once carried had sagged into something gentler. His eyes, always so sharp and distant, looked tired now, worn down by a weight I couldn't quite define. He sat behind his old oak desk, the one that had always been off limits when I was a child. And behind him, the same painting of the tidal flat still hung, unchanged, just like it had all those years. He looked straight into the camera. If Rowan is watching this, he began, his voice rough and unsteady, then I owe you the apology I never gave. The room seemed to hold its breath. I was wrong, he said. I judged you for leaving a marriage I didn't understand. I saw it as weakness. I thought you were being selfish. I let myself believe a version of things that made sense to me, because asking the real questions meant facing truths I wasn't ready to hear. He paused. His fingers twitched slightly in his lap, a nervous habit I had never seen in him before. When you came to my door that night, he continued, bruised, shaking, holding your child, I should have let you in. I should have said, you're safe now. But I didn't. I let my pride speak louder than my love. A knot rose in my throat. Micah reached for my hand again, his fingers curling gently into mine. I couldn't look away from the screen. I told myself I was doing what was right, that I was teaching you about consequences, he said. But the truth is, I was punishing you for leaving, for choosing yourself, for being stronger than I ever taught you to be. Behind me, I heard the subtle sound of chairs shifting. Someone let out a breath too loudly, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Not now. I found out the truth, Rowan, my father said. A few years back, Delbert came over with an envelope, said it was from someone who wanted to help cover the heating bill. I knew the handwriting right away. He leaned forward slightly, a faint light returning to his eyes. You sent money every single month, quietly, no messages, no name, just care. My chest tightened. Even when I gave you nothing, even when I erased you from my life, you still never stopped being my daughter, he said. Even when I stopped being your father. I felt my breath catch. I blinked hard, trying to hold back the tears. But it was too late. They came, warm, fast, and silent. I kept up with you from a distance, he continued. Delbert told me about your work at the library, about Micah. Said he's a bright one. Said he sees the world with the same quiet strength you do. He smiled then, soft, weary, and it undid me completely. I don't expect you to forgive me, Rowan. I know I haven't earned it. But if I can leave you with anything, let it be this. I was wrong. You were right. You did what I didn't have the courage to do. You protected your child. You walked away from pain. And you made a life." He inhaled shakily. "I don't want to be remembered as the man who turned his back on his daughter," he said. "So I've made changes to the will." A ripple moved through the room, startled gasps, soft cursing. Laurel sat up sharply. Dean's jaw clenched tight, but I barely noticed. "All I ever wanted was to be proud of my children," my father said. "And I am proud of you, of the woman you became when I wasn't watching." The screen faded for a beat, then it lit up once more. "Tell Micah thank you," he said, "for giving me one last chance to be a father, even if it was from afar." And then the screen went black. The silence that followed was heavier than grief. No one moved. No one spoke. But for the first time in over a decade, I heard my father, truly heard him. The room had barely settled before the whispers broke loose. Confusion, resistance, disbelief. Mr. Delaney didn't wait. He adjusted his glasses, opened the leather folder in his lap, and spoke evenly. The video message was meant to provide context. Now, as per Mr. Hargrove's updated, notarized, and legally binding final will and testament, I will read the final allocations. Laurel exhaled sharply through her nose, a sound that said she was ready for battle. Dean crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair, the smugness returning to his face like none of what we'd just seen mattered at all. "To my daughter, Rowan Elise Hargrove," Thomas Delaney began, his tone steady and deliberate. "I leave the Hargrove family home in Marlow Creek, along with its contents and the surrounding property in full." The room turned toward me in a single collective motion, necks swiveling, eyes wide with disbelief. I sat motionless, my hands still resting in my lap, Micah's small fingers laced inside mine. "In addition," Delaney continued, "I leave to Rowan Hargrove the sum of $250,000 in liquid assets, as well as all remaining balances in my retirement accounts." The tension in the room shifted sharply, like the air itself had changed weight. "And to her son, Micah Hargrove," he said, "I leave a college trust in the amount of $100,000. My heart skipped. Micah looked up at me, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, still processing the words that had just been spoken. I was trying to process them too. Delaney turned the final page. "To my son, Dean Hargrove, and my daughter, Laurel Whitmore," he said, "I leave the following: a collection of family photo albums, my old military compass, and the Bible gifted to me by my mother when I turned 18. Someone across the room gasped. Laurel sprang to her feet. "What?" Her voice was high and brittle, already cracking. "That's not possible. This is a mistake." "There is no mistake," Delaney said calmly. "Your father amended the will 2 years ago. The revisions were properly documented, witnessed, and filed with the county." Dean stood too, jaw clenched, his voice low with barely held anger. He was ill. He didn't know what he was signing. Delaney closed the folder with a quiet snap. He knew exactly what he was doing. A heavy silence fell, stunned and sharp. Then Delaney spoke again, more gently now, unfolding a small handwritten note from inside the folder. He asked me to read this aloud. "Let them remember who showed up when it counted. Let them remember the one who stayed quiet, but never stopped caring," Delaney read. "This house should go to the person who never asked for anything, and gave anyway." Laurel stormed out, heels clicking hard against the floor. Dean hesitated, then followed, dragging disbelief behind him like a second coat. I didn't move, not because I was overwhelmed, but because, for the first time in 11 years, I didn't feel erased. I felt seen. "You must have tricked him," Laurel hissed, spinning back toward me. Her wine glass was still in hand, but she'd clearly forgotten it. Her voice wavered and cracked. "There's no way he would have rewritten everything on his own. You had to..." She stopped. The words caught in her throat, the accusation collapsing before it landed. I stood there, still and silent. I didn't need to explain a thing. The video had already spoken for me. "You manipulated him," she said again, louder now, her face flushed red with fury. "After everything you did to this family, you come back in here acting like some kind of quiet savior. It's pathetic." Micah flinched slightly beside me. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Not to shield him, but to remind myself I was here, present, unshaken. Dean stepped forward then, voice low and tight. "We'll contest this. No way this holds up. He was sick. He didn't know what he was doing." Mr. Delaney didn't so much as blink. "Your father revised his will 2 years before any health issues began. He was mentally competent. Everything was properly witnessed, notarized, and filed with the court. There are no grounds for a challenge." Dean opened his mouth to argue again, but stopped when he saw the look Delaney gave him. The kind of look shaped by decades in legal chambers and zero tolerance for self-serving drama. The rest of the room had fallen still. Some of the cousins were murmuring quietly to one another, while others slipped out through the side door, coats in hand, faces turned downward. This time they didn't avoid my gaze out of malice. It was something else now, something heavier. Guilt, maybe. Regret. Laurel's breathing had turned uneven. She looked unsure whether to cry or scream. Her fingers trembled as she set her glass down on the sideboard with a sharp clink. "This is a joke," she muttered, "an absolute joke." Then she turned and walked out without another word. Dean followed close behind, his jaw so tight I thought it might snap. And just like that, the room emptied. They'd spent a decade pretending I no longer existed, but I was still here. And now, they were the ones walking away. The quiet that settled over the room wasn't awkward or strained. It was something different, something still. I stayed in my seat for a while longer, Micah's hand still resting lightly in mine. His grip had softened, but neither of us had let go. The last of the voices faded down the hallway. A door clicked shut. Footsteps disappeared. I rose slowly and walked toward the bay window, where the old leather reading chair still sat tucked into the corner. It hadn't changed, the arms worn smooth, the frame creaky with age, molded into the shape of the man who once spent his evenings there. I paused, then reached out and ran my fingers gently along the backrest. "Goodbye, Dad," I whispered. "I forgive you." The words came easily, no lump in my throat, no heat behind them. They simply arrived, like they'd been waiting. Behind me, Micah didn't say a thing. He didn't need to. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting a low amber light across the room. The old photographs, the worn floors, the quiet air. It all felt different now, no longer cold, no longer hostile. Just calm. I turned for one last look around the house. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like a place that had pushed me out. It felt like a place that had finally let go of the weight it had been carrying. Maybe some ghosts don't leave. Maybe they just settle. Maybe they don't leave at all. Maybe they're just waiting for the right words. And I had finally spoken mine. Weeks passed, and the house grew quiet in a new way. Not the hush of tension or absence, but the stillness that follows a storm. Not ruin, just calm. Micah had claimed the sunroom for his drawings. Each morning I'd find him there, surrounded by pencils and paints, sketching cardinals, blue jays, wrens, every bird he could catch a glimpse of through the backyard windows. His laughter would sometimes drift down the hallway, soft, light, and full. It filled corners of the house that used to echo with emptiness. One morning, a letter arrived in a plain white envelope. No return address. But the handwriting was unmistakable. Delbert Adams. I opened it slowly, my hands steady. "He cried, Rowan," the note read. "The day he realized it was you. I've never seen your father look so small." He carried that truth with him, quietly, until the end. I folded the letter and stepped out onto the porch. Micah sat on the top step, sketch pad resting on his knees, tongue caught between his teeth as he carefully shaded the wings of a hawk. I looked out across the yard, where the tall oak swayed gently in the morning breeze. "He saw me in the end," I said aloud, not to anyone in particular. The girl they'd tried to erase hadn't disappeared. She had just been waiting for the truth to find its way back home.